Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to make a quilt for Victoria's Quilts Canada, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today I'm going to use some donated fabric to make a quilt for Victoria's Quilts Canada. I know I want to use a free pattern, and we're going to pick something from one of the patterns or from one of the sites that I highlighted in my best places on the internet for free patterns video. I'm not sure which one I want to make yet. I've narrowed it down, but I'm going to talk you through the decision process and then let's make this quilt. So let's dive in.
I thought I would walk you through my thought process for what to make with these fabrics. So they're all fat quarters. This brown back here is a 1 yard cut, and I have a 1 yard cut of the coordinating blue as well as all of these fat quarters. So my original thought, because I've actually used this collection of fabrics before, almost 10 years ago now, believe it or not, my first thought was something from Scrap Basket Sensations from Kim Brackett. I really love her books, and it was this. I called it the knotty quilt because it looks like little knots. It's called Over and Under, and I think because the colorway in the book is really, really similar to the fabric. And I've made this quilt out of these fabrics before, mainly in the greens and browns. So I really had that in my head. The problem is Sue has asked me to sew for either Quilts of Valor Canada or Victoria's Quilts Canada. And that pattern is square. And so the sizes that those two organizations look for are rectangles, and that very, very square pattern just isn't going to work because three of those little knots across, or sorry, two across by three down is going to be a weird size and it's going to be too big. And so I had to get that out of my head before figuring out what else to do. So I looked around at a bunch of the free patterns that I've downloaded, and some of those are featured in my free pattern video from a few weeks ago. I'd narrowed it down to a couple, and I'll put the photos in here so you can see them. One is called Country Fields by Robert Kaufman, and that was the lead choice, but I'll come back to tell you why I didn't choose that. And then the other one was The Dutch Braid, also by Robert Kaufman. And then finally, Bonnie Hunter's I Spy a Four Patch. I really loved the idea of the chains, but I had decided ultimately to go with the Country Fields quilt. But then I started to look at the fabric requirements, and while each print, the pattern calls for a third of a yard of each print, these are fat quarters. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can make it work. But when you look at this Country Fields, the drama of the quilt, the success of the quilt is those rows of color. And so in order to do that, in order to make it the size that I needed to be able to cut 4 or 5 6.5 inch squares out of the fat quarters, plus have enough left over for the 2.5 inch strips in order to make the 9 patches to make all of it work. And I'm not confident. I've measured a bunch of these and I just don't think I can do it. So rather than running into a problem, cutting up a bunch of stuff, and then realizing it wasn't going to work, I decided to switch directions. And so the Dutch braid, it's cute, but yeah, I just thought, I don't know if I want to do a ton of sew and flip, and then I'm going to have a whole bunch of sew and flip units left over. And then I saw Bonnie Hunter's I Spy a Four Patch, and I love the chains that go through it. So I actually did some math. I actually went to the program that I use for quick sketches, which is called Prequilt. And I'll put the sketch in here that I'm going to work from. I've sized this accordingly. So I'm looking for sort of a 50 by 70 size quilt. I've written my numbers down here. This final version is going to be 52 by 64. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out. So I actually did a lot more math than I normally do. Normally, I just start cutting and hope for the best and then figure it out as I go along. But this time I did do some math and some measuring. So I'm going to need 104 four patches. And I'm going to make all the four patches with this brown so that I get those chains of the dark brown and then a background color. So I think that's going to look really good. And based on my math, I think I need 32 and a half inches of the brown, and I've got 36 inches. So that's very exciting. And then I need 104 4.5 inch squares out of these fat quarters. And I think I can get 12 out of each fat quarter. So 9 fat quarters, which is what I think I have here. Yep, these are 9. 9 fat quarters should give me the 104 squares that I need. So these ones are going to get put aside for something else, along with the 1 yard cut of the blue. The blue may end up being my binding for this quilt, but we'll see what happens. So those are all going to get put aside for something else. I'm going to find a background fabric, just a neutral, something either a white or a really, really light gray to put with these. And I'm going to get cutting. I will take you through some of the steps. Bonnie's pattern is excellent, but essentially I'm going to cut 4.5 inch squares from this. I'm going to strip piece the 4 patches and make a zillion, well, not a zillion, 104 of them, I guess. But I think it's going to look really sharp. It'll really feature the fabrics as well, because a 4.5 inch square out of all of these fabrics, I think will really highlight the fabric. So while we're on that Bonnie Hunter theme, Bonnie has this great expression where she says that if the fabric is still ugly, you haven't cut it small enough. That's not what we're dealing with here. These are really beautiful fabrics. So cutting nice big 4.5 inch pieces, I think are really going to show them off. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I got a lot of cutting and then a lot of 4 patch making. Simple, simple, but I think it's going to look really great. This is what my 9 fat quarters and my background, or my chain fabric, look like all cut up. So the 9 fat quarters have been cut into 4.5 inch squares, and I've got 12 out of each one. So there's 108 squares here. I'm going to need 104. I cut up my yard or meter of the brown fabric. I cut that into the 13 strips I need in order to make my 4 patch blocks with my background fabric. And I have a bunch here that I just need to iron. So that's underway. From all of that, those are the pieces for the quilt. And then these are the leftovers. I have 9 2.5 inch strips, because those were what was left on the end of the fat quarters as I was cutting them, as well as, what have I got here? I think there's 6 1-inch strips. So those were also on the end of the fat quarters as I cut them. And I never used to save 1-inch strips, but I do now. So just wait. There's, I think it's Carol from Revelation Quilts. I think that's where I saw saving the 1-inch strips for a project. So we'll come to those eventually. And then these are 2 inches by 4.5. These came off of the 4.5 inch pieces that I cut in order to get these blocks. And then one was a little short, so it's a 1.5 inch piece. So these will all go into my scrap collection. There's only 9 here, so that's not going to be enough to do the binding, I don't think, but I'll double check the measurements, and maybe if I only need 1 or 2 more pieces, I might steal from my other pile of fat quarters and use these for the binding. So we'll see when we get there. The next decision I need to make once I finish making all my 4 patches is how to lay this out. So I was thinking about making this all scrappy, which would look really cool. And I'm going to put the picture back up to show you what that could look like. But then I got to thinking, what about laying these on the diagonal? So you're going to have, and I'll only have a little bit of space here to sort of show you what I mean. These squares go diagonally like this, right? In order to give you that sort of chain look through the quilt, chains of the brown coming through it. And then of course the chains of the white go this way. And then I got to thinking, what about making all of these exactly the same? What would that look really interesting? So it's kind of planned. So all of these ones that are kind of matching would all go down one. And then maybe these ones matching, going down in the row like this. That might look really, really good. The problem is on the diagonal, I need 13. There's 2 or 3 rows where I would need 13, and I only have 12 of each one. But But in that spirit of making do, what if I stole one from one of these piles to make 13? Would anyone notice? Or maybe with the blues, the same thing. If I stole one from that pile and stuck it in, would anyone notice that it was different? Maybe on that one. The greens, I think, are really, really coordinated. I don't know. I may go to my quilting software again and color it to have those same ones all in a row just to see what it looks like. I'll do that. In fact, I will do that, and I'll put the picture up here so you can see. I'm not sure. I may lay that out a little bit of that and just see, because the substitute is the piece that bugs me. So, what would you do? Leave me a comment down below. And we'll just have to stick around for the rest of the video to see what I end up doing. I'm going to get sewing. Let me show you what I am doing in an effort to be a little bit more efficient as I make this project. Now listen, you don't have to be efficient. This isn't about efficiency or speed. It's not a competition, none of that. If you want to cut a piece, sew a piece, press a piece, cut a piece, sew, that's fine. This is all about the process, all about the journey, all about enjoying it. But if you are looking to speed things up and maybe be a little bit efficient, here's something to consider. I needed to make 13 strip sets to make these 4-patch blocks. I need 104 of them, which means I need 208 of these units to make the 4-patch. So that's a lot. And so what I've been doing is I've been taking my strip set, sewing it all the way down the side, of course, and then just with my scissors, cutting it in half. And the math works really well for this for 2.5-inch pieces. I'm going to take these over to the ironing board and I'm going to press to the dark. And then I'll come back and I'm going to show you how I'm just going to layer them together in order to cross cut them for a little bit of efficiency. I'll be right back. With both of these pieces ironed, and I will say that cutting them in half for a shorter piece actually makes them a little bit easier to iron straight. When it's a long, long piece, it's sometimes easy to pull one way or the other, and you get pieces that aren't nearly as straight as you might like them to be. So with these now pressed nice and flat, and I've just pressed to the dark side on these, I'm going to line up one of them along this line on my board. And then I'm going to flip the other one like this, and I'm essentially going to line up my pieces now before I cut them. And because I've pressed to the dark side, I can feel where those seams nest together all the way along the row here. This takes a second. This definitely takes a second, but I think it's worth it because as I cut down the line and then line them up to sew them, I sort of do all of this once for all of those units instead of doing it for every single one after cutting every little piece. So there we go. I can feel it. You can tell that it's lined up nice and tight. And I'm just gonna double check it against the line on my board, and that looks nice and lined up. And so I need 2.5-inch pieces. So I'm going to start down here, and I always cut my first piece a little bit bigger considering the salvage edge, just because I'm really right-handed. So I'm going to cut that at quite wider than 2.5, flip it around, and then cut my 2.5-inch piece. And then from this nice sharp edge, I'm going to now just cut 8 of these down the row and carefully stack them up. And then I'll just take them over to the sewing machine and then push them under the sewing machine. It goes so quickly because they're already lined up. I can feel that they're still lined up. I'll do a quick glance at the machine to make sure, but you can see that those edges are nicely nested and lined up there. And then 8 of these through the machine will take no time at all. And I did this for all 13 of the strip sets in order to get the 104 blocks that I need. The next thing that I've decided to do, and you know what, I like a planned quilt just as much as the next person, but I also really like a scrappy quilt. So referring to that discussion we had earlier about whether I was going to take the row of 13 and add a substitute, and I thought, you know what, I do a lot of that on this channel, a lot of substituting, a lot of making do, a lot of cobbling together. So I thought this time I'm just going to stick with being really deliberate and make it scrappy. I'm just going to mix them all up. These all coordinate so beautifully, so it's going to look intentional. And that helps me be a little bit more efficient as well. So what I've done is I've divided these blocks into 2 even piles. This doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be perfectly even. But I know this way that I can take all of these over to the machine and I can just sew a 4-patch to a solid, a 4-patch to a square, a 4-patch to a square. I can just chain sew those through the sewing machine. My units are also, I'm making 12 by 16. So that's what I want my final project to be. And 13 by 16. So if I sew these into twos and sew the twos into fours, and then fours become eights, and then if you add another 4 to an 8, you get 12s, right? So I'm going to go and I'm going to make all these into pairs. And then I'm going to take all my pairs and I'm going to make them into fours, making sure that the 2 plain squares are different. From those fours, I'll pick 3 of them and sew them together. That's going to give me 12 across, and that's going to go really, really quickly. And then I'll have the 13. I'll make sure I keep some aside so that I can add either a block to one end or a block to the other to make the 13 squares that I need for the row. I am not going to take the time to try and lay all these out on the floor or try to set up a design board and lay them all out. I'm not that concerned about it. I'm going to make sure that each of my rows has as much variety as possible. And then because there's 16 rows, I can move my rows up and down the quilt in order to sew the whole thing together. So just a little tip on how you can maybe speed up the process if you're looking to speed things up. If that doesn't suit your personality type, if you want to lay all of these out on the floor and swap the blocks around and work through that balance, go for it. You do you. I'm going to do it this way. I know that if I focus on the first half of the quilt, I'll have an even mix of these colors in the top half, and then I can focus on the bottom half and I'll have the same number, the same even mix of squares in the bottom half. So I'm going to sew these together, start matching them up, and start to lay out my quilt. These are the first 8 rows laid out on the floor. There's 12 in each row, but I want 13 to get it to the size that I want. So you can see where I've left the little holes, and I will go through now and put in either a solid square or a 4-patch just to finish up those rows. And then I was a tiny bit short here. I need actually 2 more or 3 more, I guess, to fill out that bottom 8th row, and then the first half of the quilt will be done. I think there's a nice mix. I've tried to avoid having 2 squares side by each. I'm not 100% thrilled with the number of dark ones up in this corner, but honestly, for the amount of time saved by just sewing them together and then hoping these different rows would work out, it was worth it. So I'm going to get these 8 together, and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the next 8 rows, and then put the quilt together. And here is the final quilt. I love the chaos and scrappiness of it, and I love the drama of those diagonal chains of the light color and then the dark brown chaining through it. Really showcases the fabric, a really simple layout, but really effective. So don't hesitate to check out Bonnie's I Spy quilt and give this one a try for yourself.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the little thought process at the end. This is a deceptively simple yet visually impactful quilt. Highly recommend it. I think it really would look cool if you coordinated the fabric in each of the diagonal rows, but it also looks great, really scrappy. And of course, Bonnie's original pattern has these really bold, bright colors. So just changing the color can make a huge difference for a pattern like this. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.